reflect the beliefs of this radio station, its management, or its sponsors. Listeners are urged to use their own discernment to draw their own conclusions.
It's now time for Faith Works with Pastor Jimmy Ellison from Noonan City Church.
Good morning, Noonan. This is Jimmy Ellison, and you are listening to Faith Works, where each week we come to you with a leader here in our county or nearby counties who is demonstrating that faith does indeed work. And I'm thrilled today to have my buddy David Leonard, who is on staff down at Point University. He teaches down there. He's also a member of our church at Noonan City Church. And David, man, we're thrilled to have you on board today.
Thanks, Jimmy. It's a pleasure to be here.
And so what we do on the show is we just kind of dive deep into your story and to hear truly how your faith has interacted with your profession and how you're making a kingdom impact with your life. So tell us, where did you grow up, and tell us a little about your upbringing.
Sure. Not originally from the South, but grew up in Des Moines, Iowa. Lived there my whole life.
And that's considered, I guess, a Midwestern. Is that considered Midwestern Iowa?
It is. It
All
is.
right.
I didn't grow up in the middle of a cornfield.
I was going to ask. And there are lots of cornfields over there, I'm told.
There's a few.
Yes, there are.
Yeah. So grew up in Iowa. Went to public schools there.
Did you play any sports in school?
Played a little bit of basketball.
Oh, really?
Mainly played tennis. That's kind of where I excelled, was on the tennis court.
Okay.
And went to church, every Sunday, like a lot of families. Eventually, started taking my faith more seriously when I was in high school.
Sure.
I'll be the first to admit what initially attracted me to the high school youth group was the ladies.
Absolutely. Hey, Ryan, we kid about this, but as a youth pastor, the best tool for growing your youth group is a lot of pretty girls. It's amazing how that works. The boys will show up if you have some pretty girls there. Man.
Pretty girls and some pizza, and you're good to go.
Isn't it crazy? That really shows you how men are wired. Something pretty to talk to, and a little food, little carbohydrates.
Exactly.
Coca-Cola. Now, were you a Coca-Cola person or a Pepsi person?
Up north we're not as particular. It's whatever is being served.
Oh, really?
But I learned quickly after moving down here to Georgia. I think I was getting lunch at a Taco Mac, and I asked for a Pepsi, and the waitress quickly corrected me.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm an Emory guy, and of course Emory was built on Coca-Cola money, and so they don't kind of train you not to even consider anything other than a good old Coca-Cola. So you grew up there. You went to high school there in Iowa. You did your sports with tennis is what you excelled in. Mm-hmm. What was your church? What was the name of your church?
It was a small Baptist church called Olivet Baptist Church.
And were you baptized in that church?
I was, yeah.
And so you finished high school, and then what happened after high school?
Went up to Ames, Iowa, and did my undergrad at Iowa State University.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, so majored in religious studies, minored in philosophy. At the time, I was feeling called to the ministry and was thinking that maybe God was calling me to be a pastor, and went on some missions trips during my time there and was very actively involved in the campus ministry on campus, and leading Bible studies and attending prayer meetings and trying to share my faith with my classmates and my professors. I was probably that annoying evangelical student in the classroom, I'm sure.
I love it. That's great, David. So was there something that happened in your high school years where you felt the Lord saying, hey, I want to use you in full-time ministry? I mean, something led you to signing up to be a religion major.
Well, I mentioned a minute ago about how the ladies initially attracted me to the church.
Absolutely.
Summer after my senior year, I was in a really serious relationship and figured that I'd marry this young lady.
Yeah.
And was blindsided with a breakup, and just broke my heart. And I'd say through the course of coming to terms with that and wrestling through all the emotions of that breakup, I realized that I just didn't have my priorities really in place, and it was time to start focusing on God and my relationship with Jesus.
Okay.
And so I got to thank her for setting me straight.
It's interesting because a lot of people would go through a breakup like that, blame God for it, and then their life derails and they would trace it. But you took that breakup and it took you closer to God. I love that. That's how you process that season.
Yeah, so that was right before I left for college, and it was with some trepidation. I headed away to college, really didn't know a soul,
right?
And but I used that challenge and that loneliness to kind of dive into my relationship with God.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
Was the best decision I ever made.
Now, a religious studies major at Iowa State, is it very religious? Because, and the reason I ask, I know that a religious studies major at the University of Georgia is not necessarily a religious experience for those. So what was that like at a public school being a religion major?
As you can probably imagine, most of my professors were not certainly not Christian, and in some cases not religious at all. For example,
but they were teaching in the religion department.
Sure. For example, I had one of my professors who I took probably 3 or 4 classes with, had a PhD from Harvard Divinity School, but was a practicing agnostic, and he taught courses in New Testament and Old Testament, and so that was a very eye-opening experience, to be sure.
How does one, and we're going to get into this because you teach Bible as well and religion. David, how does one teach from that worldview that, okay, I'm teaching this text here, but my worldview differs from what I'm teaching? Is there conflict within the soul to do that? Do you teach it as just a fairy tale? Do you teach it as this is what this book says, but it's not true? How does one reconcile that?
There definitely seems to be a tension there, doesn't there?
Yeah, absolutely.
And this particular professor used to say, because I would challenge him on that very point. Again, I was the annoying student in class, and he would say, well, you don't have to believe in the Greek pantheon to teach Greek mythology. So why should I have to believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in order to teach the Bible? Which, as far as it goes, okay, that's kind of a reasonable point. But because whether you believe in the Bible or you believe in Christianity or not, you have to recognize it's indisputable, the influence that Jesus has had over Western civilization.
Absolutely. That's and boy, any music. I had a worship pastor who was also the head choral director at the local high school. Matter of fact, his name is Dan Lane. He's now a principal over at McIntosh in Peachtree City. And I was asking Dan, I said, because they were doing this choral concert with his kids at school, and they were singing all religious music. And I said, well, Dan, how do you do that in the public setting? He said, Jimmy, all the music that was written during this era was religious music. The church had such an influence on the arts that everything was based in that worldview, that context. And so all good music from this era happens to be faith-based. And so, you can't deny the influence.
Right. So even from a secular standpoint, there's reason to take interest in the Bible and Christian history and certainly the person of Jesus Christ. I do think, though, that to do it well and to teach that with authenticity and sincerity, it helps if you're a believer.
I would say so. I would say so. So you did the religious studies. You did philosophy, and at some point you continue your education. Was that right out of undergrad?
Right. So again, at that time during my undergrad, I was feeling called to some form of Christian ministry. I didn't know exactly what, so I knew I wanted to go to seminary.
Okay.
So eventually enrolled at Denver Seminary out in Colorado.
Excellent.
Got into the Master of Arts program in philosophy of religion. At that time was super interested in apologetics. Apologetics is just the rational defense of the Christian faith. So took a lot of courses in philosophy, apologetics, logic, and whatnot. Still was sort of considering ministry, but as I got closer to finishing my master's degree there, began to feel a call in a different direction rather than vocational ministry. I was feeling called more to higher education.
Yeah, and so you finished that master's, and I know you have a PhD. Did you go straight to PhD from the master's?
Yeah, so from...
and you were like a professional student at this point, because you're like 4+, that Master's of Arts, is that 2-year degree?
Yes.
2, and then your PhD. That's pretty substantial, because a PhD, 5 or 6
Yeah,
years
so you're looking
to
about
completion?
12 years of schooling
High school.
post-secondary, post-high school. So that was...
Wow, that's a long time
That was
to
a
go
lot
to
of
school.
a lot of time in school. Yeah, but so from Denver Seminary, moved down to Fayetteville, Arkansas,
Okay.
and started my PhD at the University of Arkansas in philosophy.
Okay, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a true PhD there. And so,
It is.
what was your emphasis of your PhD?
Right. My area of specialization was epistemology. Epistemology is just a branch of philosophy that deals with theories of knowledge, like where does knowledge come from, how do we know what we know, can we know anything at all, and so on.
So can we know anything at all?
I believe we can.
You think so? There are still some truths out there that we can hold on to?
I'm not dreaming right now. I'm actually sitting in a radio station
With Ryan and Jimmy. Ryan is our silent partner. You never talk, Ryan. Why don't you ever just join in the conversation?
Because you're doing such a great job.
Well, I mean, you look like you could be a philosophy major. You got the look. You got the ponytail, man. You got the professor ponytail going.
He just needs the jacket with the elbow patches.
Yes.
You know?
Oh man.
Yeah.
That would be so good.
Yeah.
That would be so good. So good there. So you finished that, and so what does a person with a philosophy, a PhD, where does that person work once he graduates?
You have probably two options, Jimmy. You can either teach philosophy, or you can make coffee at the Starbucks around the corner.
One of the two, huh?
Yeah.
So how was the coffee making business?
Not so great. So yeah, I began applying for jobs. Eventually got offered a position down here in the Atlanta area with a small Christian college, teaching a lot of philosophy, logic, critical thinking, world religions, those kinds of courses.
Sure.
Currently, though, I think as you mentioned before, teaching primarily for Point University,
Yeah.
based out of West Point, Georgia.
Formerly ACC, Atlanta
That's right.
Christian College. Yes.
That's right.
I'm trying to think. Was that probably 10 years ago they made that shift to Point? They sold the campus and moved south?
That sounds about right. I know, when I moved down here in 2013, I think they were already Point University by that point.
Yeah. In 13 they were.
Yeah.
I remember specifically at that point them. We were at the time running our mission at the homeless shelter, and we would have groups from Point come up to actually volunteer because you have to, in order to graduate, you have to have so many volunteer hours to graduate from Point. I'm assuming it's still the case to do that. So you're teaching philosophy down there, teaching religion.
Yeah, I mainly teach a course called Introduction to Humanities, which is kind of a mix of history of, Western civilization through the lenses of literature, philosophy, theology, art. There's a real strong emphasis on how learning about the art of a certain era can teach you about the culture of that era as well.
Give me an example of that.
Well, for example, if you look at some of the sculptures from the Roman era, the emphasis wasn't so much on creating beautiful works of art as it was, championing the influence of the Roman Empire. So, there was a real emphasis in that period on works of art that gave attention to and highlighted the glory of the Roman Empire. So it was kind of in a way, kind of a piece of rhetoric rather than a source of inspiration.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there are other eras where art is serving a different function altogether. And I think the challenge is to use some of the critical thinking we do in studying these eras of artwork, and then try to apply it to our own times. And, for example, how we consume music and how we consume film and literature, and trying to be thoughtful and discerning and learning the underlying worldviews or philosophies that are being expressed in those different mediums. And I just think that's a really important skill to develop in today's culture. And that's what the course really ultimately challenged students to do.
So how do you test a student in the humanities based on success?
Right.
Because it seems like that would be challenging to be able to test the progress of a student.
And I think that's a challenge for all of the liberal arts or humanities, because these are not like
It's like math
courses where there's
right and wrong,
where there's a black and white answer. So for me, I'm looking at students' work and their involvement and active participation in the course, and I'm asking myself, are they trying to grasp the material? Are they trying to expand their intellectual horizons? Are they trying to be open-minded with this content? Are they expressing themselves clearly? Are they working hard? And if the answers to all those questions is a resounding yes, and their grade is going to reflect that.
Yeah.
But there is an element of subjectivity to that.
I'm sure there'd have to be. So tell me, how does your faith tie into your teaching? Our little tagline here is that we bring on folks who demonstrate that faith does indeed work on the Faith Works program. So how do you demonstrate that your faith works in your profession?
Well, in a couple ways, Jimmy. One, because I'm a person of faith, in one sense, the way I do my work is no different than how a non-religious person might do his or her work in terms of the mechanics of the job itself. But on the other hand, I'd like to think that I have a different underlying motivation for why I do what I do. Ultimately, I'm not trying to please my employer or my supervisor. I'm trying to please King Jesus.
Absolutely.
Come on.
Now we got a comment out of Ryan.
Come on.
So, on my best days, I'm trying to do my work with excellence, not ultimately to get the praise of men, but to get to get God's approval and to honor Him through my work.
Yeah.
So that's one way that my faith certainly influences my work. At the same time, again, because I'm a person of faith, I have a different view of the human condition.
That's interesting. Yes, that's good.
Human beings are a mixed bag.
Yeah.
There's some good in us, of course, but there's some evil.
Yeah.
And because human beings are complex moral creatures, and because I know that, I know the truth of the human condition because of what my faith teaches me, that's got to impact how I interact with students in my classroom. It requires grace on my part.
Yeah.
It requires understanding, while also holding students to high standards.
Yeah.
At the same time. So I just think that's super important, is to do your teaching or do any of your work, whether you're a teacher or not, in light of the truth of the human condition.
Yeah.
And I think that will profoundly impact your day-to-day activities.
Have you had moments when students came to you with spiritual issues, spiritual concerns, or life? They may not have realized that it was a spiritual issue, but they came to you with a problem, a situation, and opened themselves up for counsel, for godly counsel.
Certainly, from time to time, that comes up. Not a lot of young undergrad type students are necessarily looking to their professor
Sure.
as kind of a
Sure.
source of spiritual guidance, but certainly I have students asking me about their decision to pursue grad school, and what was your experience like, Dr. Leonard?
Yeah.
And what are the chances that I can land a job when I
Yeah.
finish this degree?
Yeah.
What's the job market look like? And I think that's a faith issue,
Absolutely.
is taking into account all the relevant factors regarding the job market, regarding
Yeah.
whether you can honor God and that kind of work, whether you can keep your faith in grad school.
Yeah.
Those are certainly conversations I've had with students.
Keep your That's what I was like going to seminary. I was trying to keep my faith
Yeah.
while I was going to seminary. Now that's not too fair to say that. Although there were some professors at seminary at Emory that I thought we are clearly on two different. We see Scripture and we see the world from two different perspectives.
Right,
And so, and
right.
that's not always a bad thing to be introduced to how others, somebody thinks differently than you. Of course, that's a good thing to understand why you believe what you believe. But,
Right.
So I never had those. I never went to bed thinking I don't know if I believe anymore. That was not one of my challenges in seminary.
Yeah, I don't think I ever had that challenge or those doubts either. I think that the motivation for me was more in terms of understanding why I believed what I believed.
Yeah, absolutely.
And is there any rational, compelling intellectual evidence that can support my
Yeah,
beliefs?
yeah.
And of course, that's what got me into philosophy. That's what got me into apologetics. And
Sure. Are you familiar with a book, Lee Strobel? He wrote Case for Christ.
sure.
He's got that little. I think he's got one: Case for Christ, Case for Faith, and Case for Creation, or his little trilogy book.
Right.
Which is an apologetics approach to the faith. I thought I thought his book. I've only read the Case for Christ, but I thought it was a well thought out apologetic approach from a logical standpoint, which I deal with a lot of people. I'm sure you do too. That they're not emotional when it comes to their faith. It's not an emotional experience. It's a very logical. God wired them to process and think through, different what they believe and why they believe, and that's how God wired me. my conversion experience was not a very emotional experience at
No?
all. It was okay, I understand this. I do believe this. Okay, I want to have that relationship with Christ. I want my sins to be forgiven. Thus, I do believe this. I place my faith in Christ. I mean, it was not crying at the altar and wailing and, oh, you know, I got to be saved tonight. So it wasn't that experience.
And I would say my experience was even a little atypical as well in terms of, I didn't have any sort of a monumental come to the altar type moment where, there was a sharp dividing line between yesterday I was not a follower of Christ and today I was. Mm-hmm. It was more in terms of just investing in the Christian community, developing relationships with other believers, and over time, I just sort of found myself believing all of it.
Yeah.
And then I realized I am a Christian.
Yeah.
So sometimes churches
metamorphosis approach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes churches talk about one getting saved to the community of believers before they get saved to any particular doctrine.
Yeah.
And I think that was definitely my experience.
That's great. That's great. Well, we're coming up on a hard break right now, David. And when we come back, I want you to think through some times where your faith got you through a difficult season in life and how you drew upon your faith. And so I want to talk about that when we get back, okay?
Great.
All right, you're listening to Faith Works, and I'm Jimmy Ellison.
You've been around long enough to know good stuff when you hear it. That's why you're here now. Classic Hits, WQEE 99.1 FM, The Key.
Premier Roof in Peachtree City is Metro Atlanta's residential and commercial roofing special. Free estimate. Premier Roofing works to make sure insurance companies pay for your new roof. Contact Kyle at 770-298-4741. Premier Roofing.
At Newlink, WOW, local matters. Local keeps our families and businesses thriving. WOW takes pride in serving the Noonan and Peachtree City communities and supporting Coweta County charities and events. For the fastest local internet, call 770-683-1931 and get up to 100 megs of speed for $29.99 a month. Lock in this price, save for the whole year. It's a great value that locals love.
Join us here, live from Noonan, Georgia, as we present the Health, Happiness, and Harmony Hour, every Wednesday from 10 to 11. I'm your host, Dr. Lewis Boynton. Please join us each week as we have new guests and talk about topics related to the psychological world. We're hoping that you will find interesting and helpful topics that will help you have more health, happiness, and harmony in your life. Join us every Wednesday from 10 to 11 at 99.1 WQEE Rock and Roll Radio.
The Warren Law Office, 22 East Broad Street in Noonan, can help you with personal injury, family law, criminal defense, and Mr. Warren is a trial attorney on the federal, state, and city level. 770-251-1289. Warren Law Office.
Discover the hidden treasures of historic downtown Noonan on the Goodwill Ambassadors Radio Show with Mr. Personality every Thursday morning at 9:30 a.m. right here on WQEE 99.1 FM, Noonan.
Ever dreamed of being a radio DJ or hosting your own show? Now here's your chance. WQEE 99 Rock the Key is giving you an opportunity to host your own show. If you'd like to get your advertising message across the thousands of listeners throughout the area, here's your chance. Hosting your own show is the way to do it. Perfect for attorneys, realtors, churches, sports talk shows, and more. Contact 678-673-6318 for further information. Host your own show.
Tune in the second and fourth Thursday each month for Know Your Rights. I'm your host, Charles Cobble, and we will discuss your rights and have plenty of information on what those rights are. Every second and fourth Thursday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. on WQEE 99.1 FM.
Hey, I'm Jimmy Ellison. I'm the pastor here at Noonan City Church. I want to thank you. You'll find as you walk through that we focus on three areas primarily. One is worship, small groups, and local missions. And our purpose is transforming lives for Jesus' sake, helping individuals experience that transformation. And we use these three areas, worship, small groups, and local missions, to help individuals experience that. So you'll get a sense of who Noonan City Church is, and I hope that you'll come and worship with us soon. Take care, and God bless.
Around long enough to remember getting up to turn the channels on the TV? That's classic. Classic Hits. WQEE 99.1 FM, The Key.
Welcome back to Faith Works. I'm Jimmy Ellison, and we are in a conversation with David Leonard. And David, I appreciate you sharing your story and just how the Lord has used you and is using you, specifically at Point University and teaching religion and philosophy classes down there. I wanted to ask about a time in your own life when you relied on your faith. You said that you made a logical decision to be a follower. Of Jesus. You started. It sounded like you were walking this life, choosing to make decisions that followed the example of Christ, and you realized one day, hey, I'm a follower of Jesus. I'm a Christian here. So how has your faith, or when was the time that your faith really got you through a challenging season?
Great question. So many examples come to mind, Jimmy. I think in particular, the years that I was working on the doctorate at the University of Arkansas was certainly a challenging time. I can remember when I was first applying for PhD programs and asked one of my seminary professors if he'd write me a letter of recommendation. And he said, I will, under one condition, that you take a week and pray about it. And if you come back and tell me that you're certain that this is what God is calling you to do, I will write that letter of recommendation, but I warn you, this will be the hardest experience of your life. Because, I don't know the exact numbers, Jimmy, but somewhere around 60 to 70 to 80% of those who start the PhD process don't finish.
Yeah. Why do you think that's the case, David?
I think by the time you get to that level of your education, you're typically married.
Yeah.
You have a young family in tow.
Yeah, you did at the time. You had boys at that time.
I did at the time, and there are just going to be financial challenges that you're facing during that time. Challenges that come from just being away from your family.
Yeah.
And the sacrifices that you have to make. That it takes its toll.
People have no clue of the time involved, do they?
No, they really don't. And that seminary professor of mine did know.
Yeah.
And so he was warning me to prayerfully consider this step that I was considering. And I did that, and I prayed about it, and I felt like that was the direction that God was pointing me, and he wrote the letter of recommendation, and I got into Arkansas. But it was a 5-year battle finishing that degree, and particularly at the end when you're all but dissertation. And I'm spending Saturdays and Sundays up in my office writing that dissertation for a solid year straight.
Yeah.
Is there a light at the end of the tunnel here?
Right. There's a lot of ABDs, all but dissertation. A lot of ABDs out
Exactly.
there.
Exactly.
It's a, I was kidding with David earlier, Ryan, that my doctorate is not I have a doctorate of ministry, which is a real degree, but it's different than a PhD. So I'm on the record. Clearly, I understand that it's not a PhD. So I'm speaking from my experience as a D-man. I've not done what you've done, David. But
If you want me to call you Dr. Jimmy, I will.
you don't have to. I'm Jimmy from Tyrone. That's it. That's my title. And so but we did have a dissertation class that we took, and our professor, she was, she taught us the basics of how to write, and she made this comment. She said, "There are no well-written dissertations. There are only well-rewritten dissertations."
Yeah.
Because you write, and then you tweak, and then you write and tweak and write. But there reaches a point where you have to say, it's done. It's done. You hit the send. In my case, it was a hit the send. The old school, they had to retype pages and all that, but this was, it's done. And I bet, boy, do you remember the day you submitted it?
I remember the day I defended it.
Yeah. Did they give you revisions after you defended it?
They did, which is typical.
Yeah, I'm about to say mine did too. I
Like-
think they feel like they have to. I think that's part of the.
Like they're not doing their job
yeah,
if you
unless
don't.
they tell you something to change. Yeah, you need to add this. Here, can you do a paragraph here?
But those were sweet words to hear after my committee shut the door and began deliberating on my fate. And about 15, 20 minutes later, the chair of my committee comes out and says, "Congratulations, Dr. Leonard," with some minor revisions, which is typical. But to get to that point, it was a lot of sweat and tears. And there were
probably literally sweat and tears.
And there were certainly multiple times along that journey where I didn't know if I could finish it.
Yeah.
And I didn't know if it was the right thing for me to finish it.
Wow.
But in the end, I felt like that was my calling. I'll be the first to admit that it took its toll on my soul. And there was some...
what do you mean by that?
I mean, anytime you're so single-minded and focused on one goal in life that monopolizes all of your attention, your intellectual, your emotional energy at the expense of other good things in your life, you're going to get out of balance. And it took some time after I finished my degree to get back in balance, spiritually, emotionally, physically, all of it.
Yeah. It certainly is it's a trying time. And so it was during that time that you drew on your faith. Did you draw on your faith in the midst of it? Or I know you drew on your faith to get back into balance, but what about in the middle of it? Did you find yourself getting on your knees and praying, or was it more of you got pushed, your faith got pushed to the side during the midst of it?
I mean, certainly like anyone, there are hills and valleys. And, at times, I was hanging on for dear life and praying for God to sustain me.
Yeah.
And to keep me faithful to His call on my life. Other times where God felt very distant. And those were difficult times. But in the end, at least at an intellectual level, I knew that I was doing the right thing and that I was headed in the right direction. And that gave me some comfort and some assurance that, as long as I stayed the course, that God would eventually bless that.
Yeah.
But it was hard.
Yeah. You trusted that blessing was coming, right?
I did.
At one point. So tell me, I know that you and Michelle, your wife, you guys have been married, you said, for a year, coming up on a year?
Yes.
And how did you meet Michelle, and what was the connection? How was your faith play a role in that?
Well, like a lot of folks these days, you meet online, Jimmy.
Okay, all right.
We met on a website called Plenty of Fish.
Plenty of Fish.
Which sounds like a Christian dating site, but it's not.
It's not.
Far from it.
I'm liking it. Plenty of Fish.
I mean, I would say Plenty of Fish is like a step up from Tinder.
All right, so swiping left and swiping right, huh?
Well, there wasn't any of that going on, but it doesn't have the best reputation, which is kind of ironic.
I've never heard it. Ryan, have you ever heard of this?
Yes, I have.
Plenty of Fish. You've heard of it?
Yes, many years ago. Yes.
Really? So it's been around.
It's been around.
Now,
Yeah.
was it around before you and Teresa?
It was around that. It was around that time. I mean, I met my wife through MySpace. So
Y'all are so new, on the cutting edge, finding your
not as
brother.
hip as you.
I'm old school. I just
Now, you just went up to your wife's house and said, "Hey, I want to take you out."
Exactly. Oh man! So online, I don't know if I knew that story, David. I'm not talking to Michelle about that.
Somehow in the midst of all of that sludge pit of chaos, we found each other, and I saw her profile, and I liked what I saw, and I liked what I read, and I shot her a message, and I said, "Hey, I see that we both have PhDs." Michelle has a PhD from Mercer in curriculum and instruction. I said, "I see that we both have PhDs. I think that means we're meant for each other."
That's a pretty good. I like that line. That's a pretty good line.
That was a good line.
I'm liking that. We both have PhDs,
and it worked.
Clearly, it worked. And so, how from the time you sent that great one-liner to the time you guys said "I do," what's the time span on that?
Yeah, I think it was about a year and a half.
Okay. And where was she living at the time?
She was living over in the Hampton area. She was a elementary school principal at a Christian school over there.
Okay.
When we got married, we got a house here in Newnan, mainly to be closer to her family. She has family here in the Newnan area, and we wanted to be closer to them. So here we are.
That is great. That is super there. So tell me what is next for David, and Michelle, or David, just your future. What do you hope to be in 5 years, and maybe even if you're thinking further than that, 10 years. Where are you hoping to be?
Just at a personal level, I want to be a good husband.
Yeah.
I want to.
Boy, that's a journey for us, isn't it?
It is.
It's not a quick just flip the switch. It's a daily taking steps in that direction.
So I want to love Michelle well. I want to be a good father. I have 2 boys, ages 14 and 11, and I want them to see what a good marriage looks like, and what it looks like for a husband to love his wife.
Yeah, that's good.
And I want to be a good example to them, and they're getting to the age where they're getting harder and harder and facing more challenges that we could have never imagined when we were growing up.
And it's not going to get any easier for them in the next several years either.
Right. So I just want to be there for them and be able to always have an open line of communications we can talk through, life's challenges. So on a personal level, that's what I'm really focused on right now. Professionally, I'm really passionate about the connections between faith and work.
Yeah.
Which is why I was so excited that you invited me on the show here today, Jimmy. I do some writing with a website called the Institute for Faith, Work, and Economics. From time to time, I'll speak at conferences on topics related to the integration of faith and work. And
let's go back. Tell us about the Institute of Faith. Say that again.
Institute for Faith, Work, and Economics.
Okay.
It's a nonprofit organization, I think based out of the D.C. area. ran by a gentleman named Hugh Welchel, who has written some books. For example, How Then Should We Work?
Okay.
On how to integrate your faith into your 9-to-5 work. And they offer a lot of really great resources for thinking holistically and integratively about your work. One of the most important principles that they promote, and one that I'm passionate about as well, is this idea that you don't have to be in ministry to be doing ministry. That the work of the banker, the work of the teacher, the work of the stay-at-home parent is supremely important in God's plan for the world and advancing His kingdom. And although the work of the professional ministers is vitally important, we can't discount Monday through Friday 9 to 5 either.
Absolutely.
So a lot of what I do in my writing and speaking, Jimmy, is trying to encourage believers to embracing that concept. That you can go into business, you can go into science, you can go into graphic design, fully motivated by your faith.
You can go into radio, Ryan.
That's right.
And that your faith ought to impact how you do your work. As we talked about before, I don't want to be motivated by the praise of men. I want to be motivated by the approval of King Jesus.
Yeah.
And I just think it's so important for young people today, and I preach this in my undergraduate courses to embrace that concept. If you're passionate about your faith, that has many applications. Maybe that means God is calling you to vocational ministry, but maybe not.
Yeah.
And you can apply your faith in multiple venues.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's because this idea of being a minister from a biblical standpoint is not necessarily the professional. I mean, we're all ministers as followers of Jesus.
Right.
We're all ministers, and how does that play out? And as soon as we learn how that plays out in our lives, boy, that is how the kingdom grows. That is how we expand kingdom on earth, as Jesus would say.
Well, and there's this so-called sacred secular dichotomy, which says the work of the ministry, God's work is what happens on Sunday mornings at the church. And that my faith doesn't really have any relevance outside of the church walls. And I just think that's a bold-faced lie.
From the devil. Yes.
Exactly.
Yes, that is. But I mean, we can talk about this on another show. I mean, that is isn't that the problem? I mean, isn't in our culture and in the South, what's dangerous about, you grew up in the Midwest, what's dangerous about growing up in the South is that people just assume you are a Christian. I mean, you grew up, your grandmother was a Christian, thus you're a Christian. And people live this concept, and maybe they show up to church, maybe they pray periodically, but you don't see their faith throughout their week. It's not, their faith is not played out at all.
And this is probably a generalization, but there does seem to be kind of a spirit of cultural Christianity here in the South. At least I didn't observe as much in the North growing up.
Yeah, and that's the problem, yeah.
I felt like in the North, and again, this is a generalization, that being a Christian required a little bit more of you. Because you had to take a stand and draw a line in the sand.
That's interesting.
Because being a Christian was more countercultural.
Yeah.
Which has its advantages.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yes.
Because when did the Christian church grow the most?
The persecution.
Right. The blood of the martyrs was the seed of the church.
Yes.
So there's something to that, I think.
No doubt, man. Well, man, this has been fascinating, brother. Just listening and just your viewpoints on, you know, how you're tying in your faith. And I love it that you are speaking life and faith into your students as a professor. That's because, you know, the one with the microphone, you're the leader, you know, in your context. If you got a microphone and you're standing in the front of the classroom, people are listening. You've got people's attention, people's ears, so don't squander this opportunity the Lord's given you, brother.
I appreciate that, Jimmy. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, man, it's been great to have you on the show, David. Ryan, it's always good to have you around helping us out. Appreciate all your work, the back, and thank you for tuning in today. We will be back next week on FaithWorks, where we'll talk to another leader in our community demonstrating that faith does indeed work. Have a great week.
Thanks for tuning in to Faith Works with Pastor Jimmy Ellison from Noonan City Church. Tune back in here next week for another edition of Faith Works.
Saturday night at 6 on WQEE for Freudian Slip, an hour of Pink Floyd.
Home again is burning gladly, the cloud of Ida down draws around me, softening the sound.
I'm Craig Bailey, your host for an hour from the dark side of the moon. His Freudian Slip, an hour of Pink Floyd, Saturday nights at 6 right here on WQEE.
WQEE 99 Rock the Key has opportunities for your church to be heard every Sunday. Become a part of our Sunday Sunrise, our evening services. Interested in information? Contact us at 678-673-6318. WQEE 99 Rock the Key, Noonan's home for classic rock and more.
The heat has got you down? Well, Rock Salt Milk Bar at 8 East Washington Street has a number of ways to beat the heat. Rock Salt Milk Bar offers milkshake, candy bar milkshakes, floats, malt, banana splits, and all your favorite flavors. Everything is made in-house, dairy grass-fed, no artificial colors. Open Tuesdays and Wednesdays 4 to 9, Thursdays through Saturdays noon to 9, closed on Sunday and Mondays. Beat the heat with Rock Salt Milk Bar, 8 East Washington Street, Noonan.
Hey guys, John Winters here. You know, Taku and I were just talking about what in the world to do, and then it hit us. Let's check out The Paper. Wondering where your favorite local band is playing? Wondering if there are any good movies out? Wondering if there's anything good streaming? Want to try out one of those hidden food joints people whisper about? Or how about a new recipe by a top local chef? Answers to all that and more are in The Paper. What to read, what to eat, what to do, what to watch, where to go. It's all in The Paper. Find us at more than 150 cool spots throughout Fayette and Coweta counties. And check us out at wintersmedia.net, Instagram, and Facebook.
If you're looking for a career and not just a job and you want to be part of a winning team, join the